Do we think everyone's back? Graham, do we know?
Yeah, I think people are back. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll get cracking then. What's our time limit, Graham? What's the countdown?
So I would like to finish the whole thing by 12:30.
Oh, easy. Yeah, magic.
So, yeah.
Okie doke. Perfect. Okay, yeah. As I mentioned before, so part of the kind of the main kind of vehicle for intervention design is kind of consolidating some of the work that we've done so far and bringing together each of those influencing factors kind of into your thinking, really, to guide your thinking in terms of intervention design. So this last bit is just to kind of consolidate that, kind of draw a little bit of a line, consolidate where we're up to. If there are any gaps, let's fill in those gaps. If there aren't any gaps, magic, you're in the best position to be able to kind of, to essentially be able to design what you're going to be doing. Okay, so again, I just wanted to just in terms of the kind of the flow or the process that we've gone through. So we've looked at the frailty framework and what this proactive frailty model looks like. And I'm sure there's people that are in the room today that are part of the what was the clinical strategy group frailty, but I understand it's the Leeds Frailty Partnership now. So I absolutely, I'm sure that people who are on this call now will have contributed to the design of this anyway. So we've got that context of what this proactive model looks like and our understanding that there could be and should be a kind of co-produced local solution. What are the assets in that community, and how can we link that into the framework in order to improve outcomes for people with frailty? So those 4 key aspects when delivering on the model, we discussed this in workshop 1 with that biopsychosocial approach. So it wasn't there's an obvious medical need for people living with frailty. There's an obvious social need and there's an obvious psychological need, and it's kind of bringing them together and designing interventions in a holistic way. The second aspect was working with people in a strengths-based way. Again, another important aspect for delivering on the model was coordinated case management. So obviously we know that we're likely to be working with some of our community's most complex patients, and as such, kind of navigating around different services is of paramount importance and has a kind of dramatic influence on a person's experience of their care. And also lastly, placing the person at the centre of their care planning. So working with people and not two people in order to define their personalised care plan. So the next step that we've gone through, obviously, in this population health management approach, is to understand our data. So each individual data pack for your local care partnership has informed your thinking and guided your thinking about where to start. And what are those bits from that starting point? What are the bits are you curious about? If you're not curious at this stage, and you're kind of a little bit unsure about what the data is saying, that's absolutely fine. Just let us know, and we can, essentially we can put a plan in place that we can start to bring that to life a little bit more. We've had conversations over in Otley and Airborough about kind of that kind of decision to start small or start big. George reflected before that it really worked for them to highlight, kind of focus in on something small and specific, basically to kind of focus people's attention, because it is a big and a complex condition and complex system. Starting small was good for them, but perhaps because we might have the relevant assets in whatever organisation or a cluster of organisations, we might be able to start big, because ultimately the cohorts within each of the local care partnerships for frailty are kind of approximately, well, they're over 1,000 in the cohort. So we do need to think about scale, whether that's now or whether that's a little bit later in an iteration. We're not too sure. Again, to reiterate, there's that continued offer from the intelligence team to dig further into your data pack, and that bit really is essential for defining that problem. We've just spoke about it in terms of through that multidisciplinary team lens. Of the importance of having that defined problem, and that basically kind of garners that purpose and brings that purpose together for that multidisciplinary team as a function, really. So yeah, and then the next step that we've looked at is we've had a local sense check on what it means to age well for people in your area, and that's starting to guide our thinking. And the word starting to was probably the key one there, really. It's just scratching the surface on the art of the possible in terms of that thorough and meaningful co-production. We've kind of landed the concept and kind of the theory around it, and amazing examples of where it's been used, and essentially the ownership is on individual local care partnerships to really take that and use it in the best way for their particular population. What we've then moved on to is asset mapping. Through that biopsychosocial lens, we've started to map the assets that are at our disposal in each individual LCP. So we know that frailty is complex and multifaceted, so the understanding of those assets in the community is of real importance for that effective and efficient delivery of care. And then we've arrived at data and measurement and outcomes. So we know that one of the outcomes that we're looking at is around living, aging, and dying well, defined by what matters to our people. And we know that that is going to be measured using health-related quality of life measure, and also people's experiences of their person-centered coordinated care. It's for the decision of the local care partnerships as to how and when you are going to kind of administer those measures. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really, of where we're up to, just as a way to kind of consolidate what we're doing, what we currently understand. So that's just a simple process diagram there of those steps. And I just want each local care partnership to kind of just hover on each of those as a collective, just hover on each of those processes and just have a little think. Do I have a good understanding of that frailty framework? Probably difficult because it is quite busy. Do we have a thorough understanding of those kind of delivery approaches? Are we having those in mind when we're designing interventions? Do you really understand your data, or do you need a little bit more kind of information, or even just a kind of hand-holding really through the process of understanding what that data might mean, or what the art of the potential with that data? So yeah, the ask here is just for partnerships to hover over each of those. If you're feeling good as a collective and confident with your understanding of each of those processes, then brilliant. It makes the next step all the more easy. If there is any gaps, that's essentially where our offer as the support team will come in. So if it's to do with data, as you know, Graham and the business intelligence team will be there to help with that side of things. If it's kind of anything around assets or kind of those kind of wider aspects, then that's where us as the LCP development team can help with that. So it pretty much arrives us at our homework. I don't know whether there was a change to the word homework. Some people haven't liked it, which is absolutely fine. So I'm just going to call it actions. So in order to, I think we're at that kind of process now, or we're at that stage really where, as I say, we've consolidated all the information and the knowledge that we've been discussing over the last few workshops, and really kind of it marks that point in time of design to action. So what is it? Sometimes a neat way of kind of facilitating this part is either doing some sort of process map or a logic model. In terms of process mapping, a good way to do that is to think of an individual person in your cohort. So we've got some of that we've got some of that soft intelligence about what's important to people. We've obviously you guys as partners have got experience about dealing with the people who are living with frailty. What might their journey look like through this intervention? Or I'll go into a little bit detail about what, as an example of what that might look like. Or some of you may be familiar with a logic model. So a logic model is essentially this. It's a bit of a flow between kind of starts with what is the reason essentially why you're doing this project or doing this process, and then it starts to map that flow between what assets or actions are going to be used, and then that kind of logical flow between those assets, how it's going to be used and administered, what the intended outputs are, and then what the intended outcomes are. So it starts to map some of that journey really. And if while you're doing that, it feels a bit difficult to be able to map that, we can probably link back to some of the stuff that we've just introduced. It may be to do with, and whether it's something to do with the data or our understanding of people, or the cohorts that we're working with. It kind of prompts a little bit of, okay, so what do we need to do in order to tighten this up? So a quick example of this, and I probably should have asked for permission, so I apologize, Sarah and Chris, but this is we've done something similar for it was a dementia review clinic pilot that we that took place over in Otley and Airborough. And essentially, it was testing this proof of concept for embedding a GP dementia review in a community setting. And then within that community setting, i.e. one of the neighbourhood networks, there would be some wraparound services. So the likes of Carers Leeds, Memory Lane, LYPFT and the Alzheimer's Society were there and present, and personal introductions could be made to these organisations where appropriate. And it also kind of has the potential to kind of demedicalize that kind of that process and that review really. So this is the person journey that we mapped out for this. So the person who was due a review received a letter from the GP surgery. There was a follow-up text message confirming the time, the date, time and location. The next step was that on the day of the appointment, that person was welcomed to AVSED Community Cafe by a staff member with a personal introduction. Then there was a designated waiting table within the main room where the community cafe was taking place, and then a GP appointment takes place in a private room at AVSED's site. And then following that, the GP makes personal introductions to community or partner organisations where appropriate. And then the person living with dementia and their carer were welcome to stay and have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, biscuits, cake in the community cafe where things were taking place. So that's a bit of a flow really. And if you're able to map that flow from a person perspective, by proxy, that is essentially intervention design. And if it feels difficult to be able to do that, then again, it prompts some more thought about what you guys are actually going to be doing in terms of delivering an intervention. And then lastly, the logic model. This is a little bit more structured. Some people might like it, some people it may not sit well with some people. So in the first box would be the rationale. Why is this current priority? What is the current priority to change? What is your why? Why are you doing this? Then in the first box it lists the assets. So for this particular pilot, it was the community venue, the organisation staff, the community organisation volunteers, GP representative partner organisations, leaflets, booklets, and tea, coffee and snacks obviously for afterwards. In terms of actions, we've just listed the actions in the previous person journey. In terms of the outputs, these intended outputs, so we wanted a positive, effective response from the person that's living with dementia and their carer, just a positive experience of that, and kind of a warm experience of that dementia review. and the number of meaningful introductions made by a GP to either the AVSED staff or partner organisations, and some of those meaningful conversations between the person living with dementia, their carer, and community services. So these are some of the outputs that we can kind of, it's reasonable to suggest that based on the assets and the actions could be some of these outputs. And then in terms of the actual outcomes, hopefully one of the intended outcomes was that connections were made between the person living with dementia, their carer, and those organisations. It would also contribute to our knowledge of appropriate person-centred settings within which to conduct a dementia review. It mightn't be appropriate, but we don't know until we learn, but in an appropriate way. And then also the realisation for the potential of an annual GP review to open the doors to community services. The potential to contribute to the social connectedness of people living with dementia, because it's a review that has happened literally within the heart of a community cafe. And then also one of the intended outcomes was to forge and strengthen those working relationships between partnership organisations. So again, this just starts to kind of visualise and map some of our thoughts into actions, outputs, and then ultimately outcomes. And if we're able to populate these, then essentially we're on the right track. So that would be the actions from this workshop 3. Sorry, I don't know if I can stop sharing now. Yeah. Graham, is it back over to you or Kim?
It's over to Graham, I think.
I think that's it. I think you've introduced the homework, which is fantastic. So does anybody have any questions? So we're kind of coming to the end. We said we would finish by 12:30. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I think just a reflection from Hilary in the chat there, in relation to what Neil was just saying, that it's really good always to consider the assets of the individual and carers, not just partners. I think that is absolutely critical, really good point, and we need to get into that habit of really making that our starting point.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, if nobody... Oh, cool. Well, I'll draw that to a close. I think there's been a lot in that morning session. Hopefully you were able to take some bits. We look forward to working with you in the groups between now and the next workshop, which is workshop 4, which is the kind of last of the formal workshops, and that's going to be on Thursday the 24th of September, still on Teams, and we're going to be joined by some folk from the health partnerships team within Leeds, and they're going to talk to us about systems thinking. So hopefully that'll get you thinking about where local care partnerships fit within the Leeds system. So we look forward to seeing you then. So I'll just, you can just all disappear off into the ether. Hope you've enjoyed it. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and thank you very much for being on the call. I really appreciate it, and so does the team. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham.